All right, hello everyone. Welcome to another Wolfram Language Design Review, part of our incremental language development series. And we have a variety of topics today. First one, strings, predicates.
Yeah, so we're going to
Okay,
be talking about a handful of predicates here. So I just took the liberty of listing all of our existing string predicates just for reference under the first sub-item or fairly standard complement. String format Q is kind of an outlier there.
what is it?
It is
Does this string meet this format?
does this string meet this import export format? Yeah. It's not a normal string pattern. It's specifically tied into the import export format.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So string pattern queue is actually a function that has been implemented about 6 different times in different private contexts in the system. Um, and it's primarily useful because there's a bunch of different things that can be string formats. We can't just test ahead and say, is it a string or is it a pattern? It might also be a regular expression or some combination
Yeah,
thereof.
but you can't always just put a regular expression in places where you put a string pattern. I mean, like if I have a string pattern of the form, X colon digit character
Right. Yeah,
dot
there
dot
are.
tilde tilde blah 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 blah. That's different from the regex form,
Right. I mean,
right?
all of the string patterns ultimately do have a regular expression representation, but
Sure they do, as regular expression of blah blah blah.
right.
Well, I mean, if we're going to have this, it needs a second argument which determines what type of string pattern it's asking for. Am I making sense?
Yeah, I think that's a good qualification.
So whether it's, I mean, by default it might allow a star, or it might allow, because the analog of that would be, you know, um, quotes a, I don't know whether star is anything. Yeah, star is anything. So it's
Hmm.
this, right?
Yep. Those are alternate representations of the same
Right, but
thing.
that doesn't work. There are functions for which that doesn't work. I mean, string
Correct.
replace, won't take that, right?
Yeah, because it's specifically looking for a pattern based version rather than wildcard. So yeah,
Hmm.
that's a good point that there need to be some qualifications for string patterns in some cases.
Do we have an option that means allow these kinds of wildcards? We do, don't we, for some functions? It's a very old option.
I believe you're right. I don't know the option name off the top of my head, though.
Um, uh, well, let's find out. I mean, I think there's a, what, anybody know what that is? It's in maybe information or something has that. I'm not sure. Can we look that up? Because we could have it be an option, or we can have it be a second argument here. But I think it needs something.
Yeah, I'll follow up on that
Okay.
through a specific implementation. So the next two are closely related: string disjoint queue and string intersecting queue.
I didn't know that that was character intersection. I mean, this seems
Yeah,
rather
this
weird.
is specifically characters. I think there's a little bit of a nuance difference between the character forms versus the string forms. I think in
So I
general,
thought this meant, do these strings overlap? You see what I'm saying?
yeah. So I mean, there's the version of do these contiguous elements overlap versus do the component characters in them overlap. I think I think we actually have Arnoud here, but these were originally versions that Arnoud proposed, and they're trying to map to what intersecting queue and disjoint queue do, which is looking at individual elements. But
I know,
yeah,
but I don't think this is.
What?
I mean, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say. I mean, what is the use case for these, and why is it sort of so compelling that you can't just run
Characters.
intersecting queue of characters? Yeah.
Mhm.
I'm not buying these, but I do think something I was trying to do recently with sequence alignment is something where you have two strings and you're trying to figure out whether you can line them up, at the beginning or the end.
Mhm.
So I'm saying,
Yeah, whether the
no,
specific sequence of characters have an intersection.
yeah, I mean, if I do this and then I have another string that's XCCC ba 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 ba. I want to align those strings. That's something that I wanted to do a bunch of times. I mean, it's not too hard to write the code, but
There's a function repository with your name on it related to that.
how funny.
Well, actually, maybe a more general version of this that like I've wanted for some LLM things is you give it a string and a pattern, and the question is, could this string be the prefix of a string that matches that pattern? So, for example, you might have a pattern like, oh, I just want a bunch of letters followed by a dot, right?
Mhm.
So then if I have a bunch of letters, that doesn't match that string pattern, but it could be the beginning of a string that matches that pattern.
Is there not a wrapper for the pattern, for the string pattern that can ask that?
Not that I know of. I don't think so, but I could be wrong.
Okay, but let's see. What is this doing? This is asking. Okay, this is asking for cases where the strings can overlap. This would be a more low-level string overlaps queue. Right, I mean, this is in any order, but this is just asking, can this string, what is the unified version of this string with the overlap implemented? And, how much overlap is there? Right? Okay. This is useful. I mean, this is useful for bioinformatics stuff. It's useful for these kinds of things that, for string rewriting stuff that I use this for. Well, let me understand what Christopher is asking.
Right. I think this came out early in the physics project.
Yeah. Makes sense. That was about that time. Okay. So what was Christopher asking for in more detail? You want to know whether a particular pattern, this like string prefix queue or something, would be one possibility.
Right. Is this string a prefix of this pattern, kind of ish?
Okay,
so the use case, to be clear, that I ran into was, you're generating tokens from an LLM, and you want to know, do the tokens so far, could these match some pattern? So, for example, if I only want to generate text that matches a certain string pattern, there's no point in continuing if already it's generated a token that couldn't possibly match the pattern.
Yes.
But maybe the right way to do it, I mean, one way to do it would be to have a different string match queue, string prefix queue function. Another way would be if we had some pattern construct for it. I mean, this is maybe much more complicated to do, but right, like you have a wrapper for the string pattern that says match any string that's a prefix of this pattern.
Okay, but we already have things like start of string, which is a pattern thing. Match any string, which is a prefix of this pattern. Okay, so wait a minute. Match a string that is a prefix of blah, blah, blah. So what would that be for a list? What is the pattern that is a prefix of? So that means that's a prefix of. I'm confused by this.
I mean, another way you could think about it is there is a possible completion to this string that makes it match the pattern.
It's a potential match for the pattern, but not a complete match, right?
Right. But there exists another string that you can append to the end of this one that makes it match the pattern.
Right. But this is,
I'm
okay,
looking
so
for-
go ahead.
I was going to say, so example, you're looking for XYZ in a pattern and you have XY. It is potentially a match, but it's unfinished, right? Is that the idea with string?
Right. But if you had XX, then it couldn't possibly match.
Right. Yeah. So
yeah,
right.
Rather than finding
okay, so let's
matches,
understand. Match a string that is a prefix of. Is a prefix of. So you're asking for something which is let's see. It's like a string prefix pattern or something, but that's not really right. In other words, that matches any string, wait a minute, that is a prefix of means what? Means that the string that you are matching with this, I'm very confused.
I'm not sure the word prefix is quite right.
Yeah, it's like an incomplete pattern or potentially incomplete. The pattern
is the pattern?
what you're looking. Yeah, if that's the pattern you're looking for,
as a prefix, or
what's that?
It's a string that has this as a prefix. Is that it?
I think the idea is this is the pattern I'm looking for, XYZ. I want an input that is XY to return true, but an input that is XX to return false. It is a partial pattern match or an incomplete pattern match, maybe.
The string XX
Mm-hmm.
to do that.
So
is this not trivial to do with string starts Q in like a pattern test?
No, because you're asking that the thing only matches the beginning. So in other words, as far as it goes, it matches this.
Right. String starts Q is kind of the inverse thing. It's saying that what is it? It's basically saying that this pattern matches the beginning of the string as opposed to the string matches the beginning of the pattern.
Ian is commenting here that this will be the case, that string starts Q. String starts Q. I'm very confused here.
Well, I mean, string match Q of string, comma, string prefix pattern of string would also return true.
Yes, that's right. Not the starts part.
Right.
I see.
I mean, the start would work as well, but yeah.
Yes. But let me just understand what this is. So this means, why am I being so confused here? That this means.
Maybe try an example that's more patterny. So if you write something like, letter, character, dot, squiggle, quotes, period, or something, right? So it's basically any series of letters followed by a period or a semicolon. Fine.
Yeah.
So if you wrote string prefix pattern of that, then this pattern would match A, AB, ABQ, ABQ semicolon, but it would not match A1 or something like that. So it would match anything that you could complete to form a string that matches the pattern.
So, but this is the wrong name for that construct.
So does this?
Yeah.
Does this take only string literals or both string literals and string patterns?
Well, it takes a string pattern here. Right. This represents. Look,
I was thinking it was a pattern that matches the prefixes of a specific string.
No, it's this, for example, matches anything. This is the thing which, what is the right name for this? This is something where you want it to match this. My God, what should this be called?
It's maybe a little bit like, it's a little bit like up to. Maybe it could be something like, well, prefix of pattern or something. It's a little obscure. But the point being that it matches anything that's a prefix of this.
Right.
I guess I keep circling back to the idea that it's a potentially incomplete pattern. Like I say, another example of an application would be I have some definite genetic sequence that I'm looking for, but I have a whole bunch of data that has incomplete genetic sequences. If they're all starting points, I can filter out and say, here's, 30 a 30 chromosome pair or 30 chromosome sequence that I'm looking for. I want to discard everything that just doesn't even begin the right way.
Yes, but
so the only thing is about the word complete is I think complete kind of, I don't know, like it sort of implies that like it should be complete or something, that like this is it's sort of like some weird value judgment on the string or something. I don't know.
Look, I want to come back to the case that I've found important, which is this question of whether two strings can, this is what you need to reassemble a shotgun sequencing thing in bioinformatics, for example, right? Do these things, can you puzzle piece match these things together? You see what I'm saying?
Right. That's a related one. Maybe you could implement that. I'm thinking of whether this would actually quite give you that. You might need to do either have a string ends queue, or maybe you can just emulate that with string reverse or something.
Well, I think the useful thing would be, given these sequence of strings.
Isn't there already a function that does that longest common sequence, or are you talking about something else?
The strings are potentially disjoint.
Yeah, but the longest common sequence doesn't do that because it's not an end-to-end thing, right?
There's also longest common subsequence.
I know, but that's not.
No, but if you just want to do this joining, right, and you have the explicit strings, then I think you can probably use longest common sequence.
But does longest common sequence only work at the two ends, or doesn't it work?
It works anywhere.
Yeah, you see, that's not right. We need a thing that works only at the ends.
Right, but it's not too hard to then you can call longest common sequence and then check whether that sequence is at the end.
That's an incredible waste. That's incredible waste.
Right, but in any case, I think that the reason why I think the pattern thing is more interesting is just that this is something that's a pure, like, you don't need string patterns to do this shotgun sequencing problem, right? Like it doesn't matter if they're lists or strings or whatever.
I know, but I think
algorithmic problem.
Right, but we need something that does this case for strings or lists. So that's one function we're going to need. But
go ahead, finish your thought, and I'll come back to it.
Okay, but then separately, this thing about, I still haven't wrapped my brain around this particular thing. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
Yeah, so I was going to say there's potentially two cases we're looking for with the longest overlaps. Are we looking for concatenate these strings together with overlaps if they're there, or are we looking for, any cases where these potentially overlap? Is this sort of a cases instance, or are we looking specifically for joined strings to come out of it in successful cases?
I think we want both. I think we want, look, the thing we want is, join the strings by their overlaps. We want, probably just give me the longest overlap, and I can do string length if I want to know how long it is. Or length.
Okay.
And I would argue that what we want here is longest overlap that goes, string 1, string 2. It's very clear what that means. If we had string 1, string 2, string 3, there's clearly a longest overlap between string 1 and string 2, string 2 and string 3. How do we return that?
So I guess the question is what you do when they're entirely disjoint. Is the longest overlap in that case is just null.
It's just null string. But I mean, it's unfortunate.
Right. You want a string in the first case, and in the other case, you basically need to have
a
list.
Which is unfortunate.
But why don't you want to return a single string again, joining a string 3 to the joining of string 1 and string 2?
I think in this case, we're looking specifically for what the overlap sequence is rather than the joined string.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, I think in the var-args case of the join these strings together, you would just have the strings get joined together with whatever overlaps laying on top of each other. And if they're disjoint, I guess they'd just be joined end to end.
I mean, string join overlapped or something, but that isn't the right name. And also, these could be both lists and strings.
Right. Yeah.
Although I have to say, I think the string case is more useful for the overlapping thing.
Maybe there's some use case with byte sequences on files or something where you have fragments.
That's true too. I mean, this business about reassembling things that have been fragmented is definitely a thing that comes up. And I can even imagine that you might want, in some cases, to do it even when there is some, edit distance that you're not getting right. I really think this is a good thing.
Okay.
Yeah. I really think this is a good thing. Now, I still haven't understood this thing. Should we try and explore this thing further? Or is how worthwhile is this thing?
I think maybe I'll talk to Christopher outside of this a little bit, and we'll try and get the use case down a little bit.
But this really does seem useful.
Okay.
Again, yeah. I've run into it multiple times. It must have a name in bioinformatics because it is the thing you need to reassemble a shotgun sequenced, DNA sequence or something. Make sense?
Yep. Yeah. I'll check in with a couple of people and we'll circle back.
Okay.
So this last one isn't.
It's similar to the image assemble that does this. If that helps with naming.
Yes.
It's kind of an analog.
And in fact, assembly is exactly what it's called in bioinformatics. That's not a bad name, string assemble. I like that name.
It's also, there's also the analogous, most similar function I can think of is image align. But it still might be confusing with sequence align, which does something kind of different.
Right, but what is image assemble?
No, image align, not
no.
Image
I
assemble.
know, but image assemble
image assemble is like string join.
No, I think
image
you can give. I think
like
there's.
You're talking.
I think
no,
there's
it doesn't
advanced usage of image assemble that does it. That you can specify.
Not intelligently, I don't think.
Oh, is it not intelligent? Okay.
I think it just it's
right.
like string join.
Okay.
So that's an argument against this. Okay. I mean, it would be lovely to have a name that would allow this to work for strings and lists.
We'll let that one simmer a little bit, and we'll circle back to it next time with a more concrete proposal.
Okay. Okay. All right. String within Q.
Yeah. So the name here isn't great. The actual function that's being proposed is looking for sub expressions that match a string or string pattern.
Why isn't that a general pattern construct? I don't understand. Here?
Yeah. So yeah, that's specifically, so the second argument is a string pattern, and it's looking at all sub expressions within the first argument to see if anything contains.
What? I mean, that's amusing, but it's a crazy name.
Right. Yeah. I think, contain string Q is closer, but it's not quite.
How far down does it?
Why does this? I mean, I just don't understand is this not just like member Q with level stack infinity?
No, because it's not member Q. Because it's look, basically what this is doing is it's doing a search, a string search.
Right.
If this had been written out as input form, this would be like a string search.
Right.
I don't even know what the heck it's supposed to return. That it's there? That's not all that useful.
Yeah, I mean, the cases I've run into this are you're doing something like you're scraping through XML or you're scraping through some sort of web dump, and I've got a whole bunch of data and I need to pick out which of these elements actually has the sequence I'm looking for. I've got a bunch of auto data that's dumped out, and I'm trying to find the VIN numbers. I know what the VIN number patterns look like. They're a sequence of 13 digits.
So you can use string cases.
Yeah. Yeah, you can use string cases when it's a single large string, but if I've got a bunch of XML data that's being stored as XML elements, it's trickier.
Right. So the problem with that is that string cases doesn't work on a thing that isn't. I mean, I don't know whether if I say string cases of this, a list of strings here, and I say, something like a ... right? What's wrong with that? I see. It's giving the same structure. For a list, it's giving the same structure. The issue is that string cases doesn't have a form that rodentifies, to use our old terminology, like a burrowing rodent.
Mm-hmm.
In this, so this is like adding a level spec to a string contains Q?
Yes.
Right.
But it's also the same as just member Q of the expression, comma, string contains Q of the pattern, comma, infinity.
Well, look,
like you can just use member Q to make any function effectively rodentifying.
Free Q.
How do you do that in this case? Okay, so how does it work in this case?
Right? Can you write member Q or maybe not free Q, but let's try member Q of the expression.
This thing here.
Yeah. And then comma underscore question mark parentheses string contains Q of your pattern. And then comma infinity outside the string contains Q, like out in the member Q. You might have to do 0 to infinity, but yeah.
Okay, great. How do I actually find the strings?
Position instead of member Q. And, we have a whole bunch of, and if you want to know how many strings there are, you could use count, right? Like it's sort of, we already have a bunch of functions for doing this kind of drilling down. If the only thing this adds is that it drills down, and it also drills down into strings, it's not hard to put those together already.
Why doesn't that work?
Select doesn't have a level spec. Right?
Yeah, the third argument of select is which is how many results to return. Yeah. There's no level spec. It's not clear what that would be, I think.
Yes, right. Because it's not clear that it returns.
You use cases.
Yeah. But then I've got to have this construct here.
Yeah, which is what you have in all the other, in count as well, and member queue as well, and position. So it's very consistent.
I wonder whether we should have a piece of sort of a name for this thing, blank question mark blah.
Pattern test is the name, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if I just say here,
is there
one argument?
Is there one argument pattern test? I don't actually know.
Oh, I don't know.
No.
But there should be. There should be.
I mean, the real thing is just
the parentheses on the underscore question mark thing are always weird too, right? So this would be nice because it would avoid that binding issue.
We should introduce that, a one argument form pattern test.
And it would just be a
blank question mark blah.
Right.
Just a test.
Yeah, that'll be real nice. I'll use that.
Okay, yeah, I'll talk with you
till
he's back.
Yes, my gosh.
The one thing this string
after all these years.
The one thing the string within Q, if it was a position thing, could do is it could tell you when it finds the string where in the string is the pattern, right? Like string position does. That's like the last element.
Sorry, what were you saying?
The one thing that we could add with a dedicated function in this conversation is you could say where within the string the pattern is, like string position does.
And how would you return that?
As the last element in the result of each position spec.
Honestly, I would argue that instead of returning as the last element, you would have to return it as a pair. Like here's the position, and then here's the string position.
Look, the mixed expression position and string position we've never done, and it seems fairly horrible.
It does. Right. The format, yeah, we could come up with a better formatting of the output. I don't know. I'm just trying to come up with a reason to have this.
Yeah, I mean, I had not necessarily thought of the form that Christopher mentioned, and I think, like we said, maybe touching up pattern test makes using patterns like that a little easier.
We should have thought of that sometime in the last 35 years. One argument for the pattern test. It's a good idea.
I think we discussed it in May of this year.
Really?
The mail archive link in chat.
We should do it.
And also an optional third argument for level spec for select, but I'd have to review if we prove
Okay, I think that one seems much more questionable. All right, let's continue here.
Since we're talking about string contains, is a proposal in the WFR to have a string contains all?
No.
No. Okay.
Why do we want this? I mean, it just seems like a very sort of puzzle-solving, obscure thing. For lists, contains all. I don't even know whether that's, sorts are equivalent or unions are equivalent or what. Is this sort is equivalent or sorts are equal or unions are equal?
I believe it's unions are equal.
Yeah, like contains all and all the contained ones. I think they're all just synonyms for set operations, like subset Q and so on.
Yes, that's correct.
I don't get this. I don't get the point of this.
Yeah, I mean, I guess again, this is a fairly typical use case.
Wait a minute. String contains all. I don't understand.
What is the operator form of it?
Yeah, I realize that. I mean,
so I think it's testing that the string contains both naturalist and inhabitants.
Correct.
I think that's what's happening.
Yes, it is providing a list of substrings that need to be inside the the string you're looking at.
And why isn't string contains doing this?
Because string contains, you give it a single pattern.
Yes, it's looking for a single pattern. String contains all would potentially take multiple patterns.
No,
I'm
but
sorry.
This is similar to all true.
Look. It's this case
any
here.
Of the past.
Right, that's
no, it's
any,
not.
but not all.
Right.
Yeah. But you could do this with just, I mean, if you run string contains q n times, maybe that's inefficient. I mean, I'm looking, this is from Jason Biggs, so I'm guessing this is there's some, if you have a genome sequence or something, and you want to know, does this,
I don't think that Jason does genome sequences. I think that one.
Well, but the thing you could imagine, is I've got this genetic sequence, and I've got these 3 sequences that correspond to some genes or something like that, and I want to know, do all 3 of these genes appear? But it seems like I should just run string contains q 3 times.
Right. Well, you could also run, it would be all true. Look, if this was going to exist, it would be string contains all q. Right? That would be the correct. Would it not be that? Because it's the analog of string contains q, but it's where we're forcing all of these. The alternative will be a wrapper around this thing here.
Right, like and.
Or all true. What's the analog for patterns of all true?
We have a contains all.
Right. Yeah, this is specifically an analog of the contains all function.
Well, we've got string contains q, but yet we have contains all as a non-q function. Is that correct?
Right. The contains family of functions are not q
Q
functions because they have operator forms, I believe.
But so does string contains, doesn't it? It has an operator form as well.
Okay. I don't remember the genesis of the contains family well enough to say exactly why they're not q predicates.
Well, I mean, look, string contains all q is okay, except that it's annoying that it doesn't merge correctly with contains all. See what I'm saying?
Right. I mean, we don't have headdresses anywhere else that I'm aware of where we have a implicit or for, we were talking about having a decorator for the second argument of string contains q that would say, this is an and I can't think of any other instance where we have an implicit or and some sort of headdress that changes it to an and.
Right. It's the opposite in text search.
Right.
What is the headdress in text search?
Well, list means and alternatives means or.
Which is what we should have done with string contains q.
They would.
So we don't have. What's that?
They would at least be aligned in that case, yeah.
Although I do actually think the or case is more common here.
Mm-hmm. Right. Generally, when you're giving a list of patterns, they're probably alternatives, though you can give a single pattern with alternatives, would be the counterpoint.
Isn't there a general pattern construct that means all of these must be in here? Like, for example, we don't have a pattern combination that this thing matches both, because we could have something that says it matches both, blah, blah. Or let's say, let me give a more extreme case. Right? We don't have that construct.
Right. Because alternatives is just the or, but we don't have the and case. You can't.
We don't have the and.
We can't say and of two patterns.
I think that's come up. I think Nick had a case of where he brought that up.
Mm.
You know, that seems like a more interesting thing. Yeah.
Can I ask, is and of two patterns saying that the expression matches both of those patterns?
Exactly.
So that seems different from the contains case where you're giving two patterns and you want two different expressions to match, you know, each of them.
Yes. Sandra on our live stream gives a piece of code here for the case that we're talking about. Right.
Right.
That's correct.
Which will work just fine, but
yeah,
could be more efficient with a dedicated function.
Let's explore this question about a wrapper that means, oh, I don't know. Seems kind of crazy. I'm not sure. I do think this is worth looking at. Match this pattern and this pattern. But string contains all.
It should be called alternatives with two L's.
Huh. I'm weakly positive about string contains all Q.
Okay. Well, we'll put that as a subject to revisit when talking about a inclusive or an all-inclusive pattern.
This looks bonkers.
Is it just switch, but instead of giving a pattern in the first argument, you give a string pattern?
Expression in the first argument.
Yeah, so you're...
Right. I mean, it's just the right. In every odd numbered argument, you give a string pattern instead of an expression pattern.
Correct.
Yeah, I think the point is that switch is a kind of obscure function anyway. I mean, a better form of this, which I just don't understand why this isn't, this should be string replace of this thing here, comma, list,
those as rules.
That's exactly
this arrow one, which looks much nicer to me. Is this not equivalent? What's that?
The rule and the
Is
pattern
the precedence
bind.
wrong?
Yeah. You need parentheses. Yeah.
Wait, you shouldn't. You can actually check that. No, the precedence is right.
No, you're right.
But that is a strange error. So string expression of two is just whether you do squiggle, squiggle, like squiggle, squiggle is the infix for string expression, right?
Yeah, but this. That's really weird.
Oh. Well, I'm not sure where the string expression. Maybe it's because it's replacing.
Yeah.
No. Because string.
The right hand side needs to be a string.
Yeah.
The right hand side needs to be a string and string replaced.
Yeah.
Right. So this is the problem. The problem is,
and it's not replacing the whole string.
Mm-hmm.
This is like more like replace all kind of than it's like replace.
Yeah. So how do I do a whole string replacement here? That's what that's asking.
Maybe you just use replace, and then for the pattern you use underscore question mark string match Q, or the future pattern test of string match Q.
That's pretty bluffy.
String switch seems a lot nicer than that approach.
I don't think so. I think switch is a horrible, horrible mess with, odd and even numbered things. I mean, something where you say,
it's a very procedural construct, right?
yeah, I just don't think it's a very good construct. I think this is a much better construct, but the question is for replace. I mean, if this was replaced, and this first argument was, characters of this, right? And this is this.
First, it's string split would do it instead of string replace.
What happened here? This is. Yeah, that works fine.
Mm-hmm.
You could also change string replace to string split and put a first in front, and it should work.
Why does that work?
String split with rules as a second argument replaces
Interesting.
the left-hand side with the right-hand side, and it can be any expression because it doesn't try to join them again.
Yeah, I didn't realize that it didn't need to be a string.
Well, I think this functionality, that it's a string pattern going to an arbitrary thing for the whole string, is useful. The fact that it has to be back to a string is really kind of yucky.
I think we figured out why somebody decided to make a resource function.
I still honestly think that this is just a very obscure thing to want to do.
Yep.
I mean, you have to write a little bit more characters. You have to write a pattern test, but it's not that bad.
Right. Well, the only thing I can imagine, I can see this showing up in a whole bunch of scraping like code.
Yeah, I was thinking either scraping like code or some sort of prompt handling code. If I get some input that has a question mark, I call a different function, or a very rudimentary.
Right, what are we going to do with this? I don't think this is, if we can think of a really great name for this thing that represents this kind of whole string replacement, perhaps there's a future for this.
Okay, well,
also for half of the use cases we just talked about, you want string contains instead of string match. If you get what I mean?
Yeah.
So I don't know. It just seems like it's a really obscure.
All right.
Thing.
I'm just not buying any of these string set functions. I'm just not buying these. I just don't understand why you can't just say characters.
Yeah, I mean, in this, these were a handful of functions we pulled. I think these were all Arnood functions, but originally, the idea is basically you're pulling out, just as you see there, characters and then doing set operations, and maybe that's not really that interesting.
I don't see it. I mean, why can't you do it with complement, in this case, complement of characters? I mean, is this wrong if I say complement of characters of this? Yeah, it's in a different order. What does it mean that it's in different order?
It's sorting them, complement sorting them.
I know that, but I mean, string complement is not for some reason. What's the argument for string complement not to sort them?
I probably should sort them like a string union, an intersection, we're sorting them. So,
well, then it's just a string join of this.
mm-hmm.
I'm not buying it.
Perhaps there is a possibility that the contains family could do this itself. It currently doesn't do anything on toStrings.
What do you mean?
So the contains family currently works on two lists or two associations. Oh, lists and associations.
So
I think we have some.
what?
I think we have some functions that work both on lists and on strings.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, like
there's longest
subsequence
subsequent things.
Yeah.
All the dissimilarity measures work on lists and strings.
So I'm just saying that the contains family could decide to apply characters to strings.
Okay, but what is the contains? What would the contains family do? So you're saying complements could do that, for example?
No, the contains
itself could.
Yes, but I think complement feels more set related. Contains might.
Yeah, but what contains function?
The 5 contains X, contains all, contains none, contains exactly.
Well, I agree. I don't see any downside to doing that. Seems very sensible to me.
I put
Any
in the
objections?
chat. I put in the chat a function Rick made in the function repository called string function that basically, applies any set-based function to characters. Right? It just does characters, and at the end it does string join. Right? It's just a wrapper. Which, it is nice. Because we had a whole bunch of these come to function repository, and this sort of stemmed the tide of having a dedicated function for each one.
Maybe this is the right answer. This is nice.
Yeah, like permutations is nice there, rather than having string permutations.
This is nice. I would use this a bunch of places. That's better, because then we could just say, presumably we can say string function of contains all, and then the arguments.
Mm-hmm.
Blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Or just a thought, what if you had an option for contains all or for these functions that was like make it for strings or something?
No.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, I don't think we want an option that changes what heads it operates on.
No, absolutely not.
Should the name be something more like characters applied?
Yes, it should be. Or string applied.
Right. And in the case where there's more than one argument, each function will have to have a little bit different logic potentially, as opposed to what's pulled apart and what's not.
Right.
Okay, yeah, I'll tear into what the thorny cases on that are.
String applied is interesting. It's really quite interesting. That's really quite nice. Okay, so that would in fact give us all of these. String sort. What is string prepend?
Basically just a special case of string join. Same with string append.
Why do we care? I don't understand. What's the difference between this and string join, except it has an operator form?
Primarily, there's an operator form. I mean, I guess the same notion of why we have prepend and append and join, but
no. Prepend and append take different list structures, right? Because list, a single element, they take single elements rather than lists.
Right.
I much prefer string applied. I think that's a much better thing.
Okay, so this is circling back to something we've talked about one or two times in the past, which is the idea of splitting a list before,
Yes.
after, or at a specific case. The last time we went around it, we liked the idea of a split cases as a generalized version of it.
What is split cases?
The idea basically being that we give a pattern where we split it and we can pull out elements before, after, or at the specific splitter rather than having a dedicated before, after, and at.
Okay. So what do you mean? How does that work?
I mean, basically, we're looking, with a split before, we basically are looking at a specific pattern, and then we are segmenting the list, or in this case, the string before.
So in other words, what you're saying is that if split, for example, I mean, this ordinary string split, I don't know why I always type splot instead of split. I do it every damn time. I don't know why. I don't know what word. Okay, so the issue is what happens to the separator in here?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so why isn't split? Oh, I see. Split has a test rather than split at, which will be another function that we could have is split at. Right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so you're saying that string split could have an assembly argument.
Yeah, basically, what do we do with the separator or the?
Look, you see, we got all these things.
Mm. Right, because rule is a replacement, and you.
I mean, couldn't this just use the options that string template has, insertion function and combination function?
I suppose.
I'm not sure if that accomplishes what we're the main objective here.
What would be the point of insertion function?
I mean, yeah, it's a little different than is in string template, right?
Yeah, it is.
I mean, really what this is a post-splitting function. What you've got is, what do you want to do? You've got two elements. You've got the separator, right? So you've got the separator. I suppose you've got the before string and you've got the after.
Right.
And for every split, you've got those three things.
Well,
which
if
obviously
the separator is a pattern and not explicit, you also have the things that matched.
But I'm saying the separator is the raw separator, not the input. It's what actually matched the separator.
So it's a list in general.
Why is it a list? It's the separator, the separator. For each element here, like this might be BBB dash 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 dash. That's the separator. This is a separator specific list. So there's be a list.
Oh, I see. Okay, I see. Okay, so you have a list of these associations.
Yeah, for each splitting that happened.
Before and after might also.
I was thinking it was the transpose of what you have here.
What were you saying about before and after?
I was saying before and after could be start of string or end of string, potentially, for the first and last elements.
They could be, yes. And by the way, I have no idea if, something like string join, I bet this doesn't work. Yeah, doesn't work. I mean, that could work.
I think it generally doesn't work on patterns, right?
No, I agree.
But yeah.
But it could work for this case. All right, so in the split case, the question is, I mean, or is it the case that all that really happens is what's the residue that gets left after splitting? How much of the separator is left after the splitting?
Right. In data scraping, your delimiters are sometimes meaningless markup. They might be colons. Sometimes they're meaningful. You might have records that are separated by dates. And so you might have a date pattern and say, I want to stick that with the element before it rather than just throwing it in the bin.
Yeah. Okay, so let's think about this for a second. So what other functions do we have? And I agree, templates are an example. Maybe not much of an example. No, they're not really much of an example. What other functions do we have which pick up a thing that is essentially metadata or something like metadata? Yeah, so let me think about this for a second.
Form layout function, which I've still never figured out how to use.
Which one?
Form layout function for form object. It's
operates, not the world's simplest function.
It is not. I've never figured it out. But it takes some structured metadata and then gives a form object or a grid or something.
Yeah, I mean, look, date string has this kind of stuff as well. It has a way of specifying sort of a template for what gets put together.
Yeah.
Okay, hold on here. The main issue is this becomes more poignant when the separator is a pattern, when the specified separator is a pattern.
Right. That's the case that's particularly interesting. If it's just a repeated character, then you can basically just slap it on. But if it's a significant sequence or a meaningful pattern, then
yeah. Okay, hold on. I mean, the obvious function would be one where every other element is the separator. See what I'm saying?
The separators are basically riffled into the list.
Yep. Kind of like a version of string split
that keeps the delimiters as extra elements.
Yeah.
String cleave.
Well, or an argument structure for string split that makes it do that.
So it's a rule form that replaces, it puts the given value at the delimiter.
Inserts val at the position of each delimiter. Well, it's essentially what we want. We just want pattern goes to itself.
Yeah, I've done that before.
X colon blah arrow X. All right,
so but that doesn't get the before or after case where you then want to partition and string join the sublists.
Oh, we can deal with that. I mean, there are a million different things you might want to do there. But if you want it, the afters, you just do partition comma 2. Otherwise, you do partition 2 and then off with an offset of 1. Right? That doesn't seem hard.
No.
So really all this is a string split I mean, if I didn't think it was it really wants to wrap that rule, because we don't want to say string split, string pattern arrow automatic or something, or inherited. That seems too obscure.
Yeah.
Plus, you might actually want to use those functions.
Yeah, you might want those literals in there.
Right. So we got to wrap the rule, or we got to have it be something other than a rule.
And rule delayed works as well, so you can do.
Oh yeah, there's no problem in doing this. Okay, X colon pattern arrow X. That will just work.
Right. Right.
It's just rather bizarre. Now, another question is whether the default case of string split with one argument is a case where you might want to include the where you might want to include what was taken out. I think not. But you might want to include the pieces of white space, so to speak.
Yeah, I feel like that's probably uncommon enough of a desire that having to use the 2-argument form with a white space character goes to whatever is probably
okay.
fine.
So the question is, what could you wrap or put in that second argument that is visibly not? Because remember, split has a test there, so this is really a string split story.
Mm-hmm. We had like a keep head or something to wrap the pattern.
Yeah, but remember, the second argument is usually a string pattern. So there's no good. Well, all right, that's the exercise, is can we get
some meaningful syntax or some proper,
I mean, it could be done with a triple rule, but I hate that. All right. Okay, anything else here?
No, I think that's it for today. We've got a number of things to circle back to at another time.
Great. Okay, just don't forget all the random things that are being sent in, because there's some important ones, as I recall.
Yep. Yeah, we have a running list of everything.
All right. Okay, see you guys later then.
Thanks all.
Bye.